Q&A Christmas special. Hello, my name is Stephanie and I'm your host for today's episode of What About It? I know, normally Felix is sitting here, but today it's me. And I've got a special guest for you. All welcome, Felix!
I always wanted to do that. All right, we've got something special for you prepared for the end of the year, as we're going to skip the next two Thursday episodes. We asked the community if they've got any questions for us that we could answer in today's episode, and they basically gave us loads of questions. And we're going to try to answer them as best as we can, or I'm going to try to answer them as best as I can, and she's going to ask the questions for the community. So let's get started.
So Jack is asking, what's your opinion on the proposed Ariane Next?
That is a good question. I've had an episode about that. We're gonna put a card, an info card in the corner, so you can check it out, because I've talked about all the proposed reusable rockets in that, or most of the proposed reusable rockets in that episode, because they're actually it's getting more and more every day. Basically, everybody wants to get the rockets reusable. So what he's asking is, Ariane Next is basically a project by ESA to try to get Ariane rockets cheaper, more reusable, and more flexible. And he even linked me a video from Vimeo about the Prometheus engine. The Prometheus engine is a part of the Ariane Next project. There are a few components to the whole idea. Prometheus is a Methalox engine that's going to be 3D printed, so it's fast production, cheap production. It is going to be very flexible because it's got a hexagonal mounting system, so you can use it on different rockets. You can use 4, 6, 8 engines. You can interchange the whole setup basically. So the main purpose there is to make it cheaper and more flexible. They are saying that it could be reusable, but there's nothing known about that yet. And the Ariane Next basically is, there are different components to it. It's Ariane Works, working on a fully reusable rocket. Themis is the name of it, but it is still in a very early stage, and we'll have to find out basically if it's ever going to turn into reality, but they're working on it, and it's taking a similar approach as the Falcon 9 boosters basically. And my opinion about the whole thing is that it is the best thing to do right now. SpaceX has started something new with the Falcon rocket system, and it's the reusability that drives down costs, and it makes you it enables the launch provider to launch many more rockets. The reason why we, in 2018, for example, saw so many Falcon launches is because they can just turn around the booster and launch it again with a new upper stage. And that's what Ariane Next is trying to achieve as well. So it is the best thing to do right now. Ariane Space has for a long time said that they don't want to go reusable at all because it wouldn't be feasible for them to just produce 1 or 2 rockets per year. And they've changed the course. Recently I had an episode about ESA ramping up their budget. They had the biggest budget ever in the history of ESA for the next 4 years. And that all plays into Ariane Next basically. They're trying to renovate the whole system basically. So I'm all for it. Thanks for the question. Good one.
Thank you for your answer. Chris is asking, is SpaceX designing a spacesuit for possible EVA? And would NASA allow private company astronauts to perform spacewalks while at the ISS?
All right. There's nothing known about an EVA suit for SpaceX yet. I've actually researched into it again, and there's still no official news about anything. They will have to have one if they want to go to Mars or to the moon, and they don't want to use NASA tech. But right now there's nothing official about that. The suit they're using right now is an IVA suit, and that is EVA stands for extravehicular activity, and IVA stands for intravehicular activity. So it's basically a flight suit. When they are sitting in the Soyuz capsules, that's the flight suit basically. And the second part of the question was if NASA would allow
spacewalks for private astronauts.
Spacewalks for private astronauts. Yes, but a spacewalk is something that is a very complex, complicated operation that is normally trained for at least a year in advance. So if there is a private astronaut that has to do an EVA, and the company he works for trains for a year or even more to do that EVA, and they provide NASA with all the information, and that they plan the process the same way NASA would, they would probably allow them to do it. But you had to ask the question what it would be needed for. ISS is operated by NASA, so that would be NASA astronauts fixing and changing parts and adding parts and all that kind of stuff that a spacewalk normally is used for. So the other thing would be recreational spacewalks. That's a different thing. You don't have to plan that. You just open up the airlock and float in space. We're a long shot from that yet because we don't have any space hotels or anything.
Not yet.
But in the future, if we have a space hotel module attached to the ISS, or even hypothetically speaking, it was a recreational module and there were space tourists in there that would want to go outside, I think NASA would permit that because it wouldn't touch any ISS systems. You could arrange it in a way that the tourist EVA astronauts wouldn't be able to damage anything, and you could make it a guided tour or something. And I think NASA would probably agree to that. It's hard to tell, but yeah, if it all comes down to the planning basically. If they plan the whole thing the way NASA would plan a spacewalk, I think they would. Yes.
And they're trained and have enough experience.
Exactly. If it's a full-fledged spacewalk like NASA does the stuff, it is an operation that is being planned for a year or even more, and I think that would be for space tourists. They would never allow a space tourist to do a work on the ISS. But if it's just recreational, so you can just look at the Earth floating in space, I think that would be something different, and I think NASA would allow that. Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Dory is asking, and speaking of the spacesuits, are the SpaceX designed suits pressurized? If so, how? And if not, do you think they should be? Okay,
it is an IVA, like I said in the last question, so it's an intravehicular activity flight suit, and yes, it is pressurized. It is hard to tell on the SpaceX suits because they have this seamless, looks like a jacket and some pants, whereas the NASA suits have these bulky connectors where you can attach the tubes for oxygen and everything. SpaceX has found a solution that is hard to find when they're not connected, and that's, I think, the reason why most people are having this question: is it even pressurized? Yes, it is. When they're not connected to any external life support system, providing them with oxygen and CO2 removal and all that kind of stuff, it is sealed. It is on the knee, on the right leg, but just above the knee. I'll put a picture in so you can see it, or even a video if I can find one. There is a connector. There is some cloth on top of it, and you just pull that down, and you have a slick-looking connector that has all the oxygen and CO2 removal and everything that is needed for actually that is basically all that is needed because it doesn't have a cooling system. But yeah, there's a connector on the right leg that basically provides the suit with the same things that the NASA flight suit would have as well. So yes, it is pressurized. It is not possible to do an EVA with it, of course, because it doesn't have any internal systems needed for an EVA suit. It doesn't have cooling system because in space, when you're facing the sun, it can get really, really hot, and you need an active cooling system. You need radiation protection. You need an internal life support system. All that stuff is missing on the SpaceX suit. But yes, inside the capsule, if in an anomaly event and the capsule is losing pressure, the suit will protect them as much as the NASA flight suit would. It's the same thing. It's just a very sleek solution that you can't spot when it's not when it's not connected.
So Rob is asking, how will the Starship change the way we use space-based telescopes? I understand that James Webb can be serviced in space and others' plans are held up because of their size and no suitable launch vehicles.
Okay. First of all, James Webb is not going to be serviceable. NASA has thought about it, but you got to see the difference between Hubble, which was serviceable, and we had some very interesting missions regarding servicing Hubble, and James Webb. Hubble is roughly 600 kilometers away from Earth in still low Earth orbit, and that is pretty easy to reach. James Webb is going to be at the Lagrange 2 point, facing away from the Sun. The difference there is it's 1.5 million kilometers away from Earth. Servicing James Webb, they've thought about missions, maybe even bringing it back into low Earth orbit to service it and then send it back up again. It's not feasible. So James Webb's going to be on its own. If there's any problem with James Webb while it's in service, it's just going to go out of business, and that's basically it. It's just because it's too far away. The next part of the question is about future telescopes that are planned. The biggest limitation on space-based telescopes right now is fairing diameter and total payload capacity.
Okay.
That's what they're all limited in. Telescope, the biggest benefit you can get a telescope is a bigger mirror. James Webb has a 6.5 meter diameter mirror, and it's achieving that by doing some crazy folding technique to still fit into the fairing. That is basically about the maximum we can go with a launch vehicle from today. What Starship, if it works, is going to improve. First of all, it's got a diameter of 9 meters, so you can fit a lot more inside without folding it up. Secondly, it's going to have 1,000 cubic meters payload bay, which is a huge space in itself. You don't only have space in diameter, you also have space up and down when you put the payload in. So it's a huge fairing. One of the reasons why James Webb took so long to develop was because they had the folding technology. The whole thing is basically folded up, the sun shield is folded up, the mirror is folded up, and it's going to take the telescope half a year to unfold and get operational, just because they had to cramp it into this really, really small fairing. And that's the biggest change with Starship. Imagine a space-based telescope that uses the same kind of folding technology, but in a fairing that is as big as the Starship. And that is going to be the biggest benefit for Starship when it sends up space-based telescopes. Sadly, all the projects, I think there are 4 projects right now proposed to NASA, and one of them is going to be picked, and that's going to be sent up in the mid-2030s. So that is still a long way. 15 years or so. And all of these 4 projects are based on today's generation of launch vehicles. So there is nothing known about a project that could utilize a Starship, because all the projects concepts are based on today's launch vehicles. As soon as Starship works, they're going to be proposing missions that are specifically designed to be lifted up with a Starship. And that's going to mean bigger telescopes, bigger mirrors, more resolution, and projects that we can right now just basically dream of. But they have to be proposed first. So Elon, hurry up. So the scientists and the developers actually propose a system that is designed for Starship. Before that, we can't say anything more than a bigger mirror is a better telescope. Yeah. And you can do that with a Starship. Yeah.
Thomas Scher is asking, NASA and Boeing are working on a long-term 10 SLS contract to get the price of SLS down from $1.6 billion to only $800 million. What do we really know about the cost of one flight to the moon in the Artemis program? And does it make sense to order 10 more SLS boosters?
Okay. First of all, thank you for the question. It's always nice to talk about the Artemis project when it comes to budget. I'm gonna split the question into as many segments as I need. So the whole thing with the 10 SLS launches going down from 1.6 billion to 800 million per launch does not really have to do anything with the Artemis project. It's just related to the launch itself. The price tag to get Artemis to the moon by 2024 is $30 billion right now. There are already rumors that it could go up to $40 billion. So it is an insanely expensive project because there are so many different aspects involved. The Lunar Gateway, the SLS launch system, the Orion spacecraft, the European service module, the astronaut training, the mission equipment, everything. It's a huge undertaking to send people to the moon with the SLS. All right, and then there is the proposed price cut when you order 10 SLS boosters, 10 SLS launches, to go down from 1.6 billion to 800 million per launch. So, like I just said, that is just referring to the price of the launch system itself. So it's just the rocket itself. You would have to order 10 SLS launches to get it down to 800 million, which is still a pretty steep price tag. If it makes sense, yes. All right. The Artemis project is something where a lot of different companies are involved, and it's a political thing, and it's closely related to politics because all these different companies are in different states, and these different states have different opinions, political opinions, and they don't want to lose jobs. They want to boost their companies that are inside these states, and so on and so forth.
And you don't talk about political stuff on the channel.
And I don't really talk about political stuff on my channel. That's one of the reasons why I don't have that many episodes with the Artemis project in it, because it is such a touchy, sensitive topic right now, because it mixes politics with what I am actually interested in. I am interested in the space industry. That's what I say on every episode in the beginning. There's a lot going on in the space industry and not in the Senate or in politics or anything. So if we take all the politics out of the Artemis and the SLS, it does make sense to want to go back to the moon, to want to research new technologies, to want to drive us further in the solar system, to explore, to maybe even make a lunar gateway and then a lunar base and maybe a Mars gateway and a proposed transfer shuttle and all that kind of stuff that is long term after the Artemis project. So it is a long chain of developments, and that always makes sense, but you have to do it in a way that is feasible, that puts the money into good use, and that is even without the politics. It's not what I'm seeing with the SLS and the Artemis project. It's wasting a lot of money, in my opinion. I think a lunar gateway is not needed if you have a proper launch system that can get the astronauts all the way to the surface of the moon, because the goal is to make a moon base, not to make an orbiting station. In my opinion, it doesn't make sense to order another 10 SLS launches right now, because the whole launch industry is shifting to reusable launch systems. And if Starship succeeds, which is not set in stone right now, it could also fail. But if it succeeds, 10 SLS launches ordered long term until the end of the 2030s or something wouldn't make any sense and should be cancelled, and something else should be used. But if Starship doesn't succeed, you could even build a lunar gateway with Falcon rockets. Yeah. But a Falcon Heavy can get, I think, 21 tons of payload to lunar orbit, to lower lunar orbit, where you would have to build a lunar gateway and so on and so forth. So the modules for the lunar gateway or for a lunar base even would be very small, because it doesn't have the payload capacity. So it would be really hard to do it with a Falcon rocket. So if Starship doesn't succeed and SpaceX doesn't build a super Falcon Heavy or something, an SLS system does make sense. But still the price tag is very, very steep, and it's not reusable, and you waste the rocket every time you launch it. So that should be changed anyway, in my opinion.
There are other companies trying to make rockets reusable as well, so it's not only Starship.
Exactly. So I think NASA should embrace that shift to reusable systems. I would agree a lot more with SLS and the Artemis project if SLS was reusable. If it was just a large reusable rocket, I'd be cheering on every episode. But and then the price tag would be much lower as well, because you don't have to have a new rocket every time. You do not have to order 10 SLS launch systems if it's reusable. You have to have 2 or 3 maybe. If you can reuse them 3 times, it would be 9 launches with 3 rockets instead of 10. So that's where's my biggest problem with the Artemis project, is that SLS is not reusable. That is what they would have to change. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. So next question is from Warhawk. SpaceX is building 2 launch sites, both launching towards the east. Are there any advantages for missions launching out of one over the other?
They both have this roughly the same latitude, so there is no advantage in gaining speed because you're closer to the equator or anything. Texas and Florida, or Boca Chica, because Texas is pretty large, Boca Chica and the Cape are almost on the same latitude, so there is no advantage there. Both launch their rockets to the east, meaning they both fly over the sea. There's no advantage there. But at the Cape, there's a lot more than just SpaceX. There are all the major launch providers, lots of launches. So you have to arrange with the others. If an Atlas rocket or a Delta rocket is launching, or if any other activity is going on there, SpaceX can't launch. And we've had that a few times, that SpaceX wanted to launch, but there was no launch window because somebody else was launching. And you can avoid that, because in Boca Chica,
there's nothing.
Well, SpaceX is launching, nobody else is launching, and they're not even launching. But as soon as they are, it's going to be only them, and that is an advantage, definitely. As it's launching to the east, but it is so high up at the point it reaches the Cape or anything close to the Cape that you don't need to bother anymore. You can just change the orbit slightly, and you will avoid any launch activity going on at the Cape. And so that is an advantage. You have less population, meaning if something goes wrong, you have less problems. If the rocket comes down in a cornfield, it's much better than if it comes down in a populated area. So that's another advantage. But other than that, just regarding the orbits that you can achieve and the fuel that you need, it's basically the same thing. The only advantages would be that you have less regulated airspace, you have a less populated area, and you have far less other activity going on there. So that is a good thing about Boca Chica.
So do you think we will see a Falcon 9 launching out of Boca Chica?
Not if Starship succeeds, because SpaceX has already said that they are going to phase out the Falcon architecture. They didn't say they're going to cancel it immediately, but they said I think they said as long as somebody wants to fly with a Falcon rocket, we're going to provide a Falcon rocket. But if Starship does what it's supposed to do on paper, it's going to be much cheaper. It's going to be able to launch much more often, and it's going to be able to get up any payload. And basically, even if you just send up 2 tons of payload with a Starship, it's going to be cheaper than a Falcon rocket. So as soon as the thing is reliable, as soon as it works, and as soon as the whole process is proven, nobody's going to order a Falcon rocket anymore. I couldn't find a reason why you would want to launch on a Falcon 9 if you have a Starship that has proven to be reliable and much cheaper. You would have to have a different launch mount. You would have to have a different infrastructure, because the Falcon infrastructure runs on RP1. So you need different fuel farms, you need a different launch mount, you need different tech, you need different people that know how to handle the Falcon rockets, and so on and so forth. You would have to change the whole launch facility to be able to launch Falcon rockets out of Boca Chica. And they have that already at the Cape. So they would have to invest money to be able to launch with the old launch system that is going to be phased out in the future. So I don't think that there would be any possible good reason why you would want to launch Falcon rockets out of Boca Chica. They have 2 launch sites, and they're enough for the launches. They don't need more, and they're equipped with everything they need. Thanks for the question.
So, Evelina Landell is asking, what about that awesome braking mechanism on Blue Origin's New Shepard? No one's gone into any details about that. So what about it?
Okay, so you mean the ring fin, I think, the airbrake system. There has even been a a Starship ring recently that they cut in, that they cut out these square holes, and people approached me and asked me if that was something similar to the Shepard braking system. The Shepard braking system is a really neat mechanism to get a lot of airspeed out of the rocket before it needs to use its engines to actually land. So that is a brilliant solution, but it only works on a very small launch vehicle. Because if you enter the atmosphere with at orbital speeds, which the Shepard doesn't do, the launch vehicle itself produces a shock wave, a bow wave under the rocket, of course, because it's punching through the atmosphere at high speeds, and that produces a shadow, a wind shadow on top of the vehicle, because that bow shock pushes away the air, and so a ring fin on top of, let's say, a Starship, for example, wouldn't make any sense, because the rocket comes in at such a high speed that you have a really, really big shadow on top, and the air brakes wouldn't be affected. So that's why the Falcon rocket, for example, uses the grid fins to steer and uses the engine for a re-entry burn and a landing burn, because you can't put air brakes on it if the rocket itself is in this shadow, in this wind shadow that it produces. The air brakes wouldn't be affected. So it is a really nice solution for the Shepard rocket, but it's not going to be pursued even by Blue Origin. We have seen zero evidence of them using the same thing on a new landing day. On all the concepts, don't have that ring fin on top where you can put air brakes in or anything. So I think that is the reason. It's just physical. Yeah. If you have that air shadow, you can't use the air brakes on top. So it's a really nice system for the Shepard, and it works flawless, and it saves a lot of propellant. But as soon as Blue Origin goes bigger, that thing's gonna vanish. That's my idea about it. So yeah.
The last question for today is from Stinger. It's been an interesting year throughout the global space industry. What single moment or event has intrigued you the most, and why?
Yeah, that would be August 27th, the second Starhopper flight. Right now, the single most interesting thing in spaceflight industry for me is the Starship. You can see it on my episodes. On every episode, I have a Starship update segment that is at least half the time of the episode, because if that thing works, it's going to change everything. It's gonna enable us to send up payloads to space insanely cheap, insanely fast, and a lot of it in one flight. It's going to open up so many opportunities, space tourism, a low Earth orbit infrastructure, as soon as Starship is operational. And Starhopper was the first thing we could see of that project. I had a live stream, and I think Stinger, Sammy watched it with me. And maybe you can remember how I cheered when that thing lifted off. It was just phenomenal, and I really hope that SpaceX is gonna accelerate with Mark III, that they're gonna succeed with it. I'm super interested in the changed flight design that Musk already talked about. They scrapped the whole Mark I system basically, so that's a strong indicator for them changing course. They are training the welders better, and they're stepping up the game right now. And so, yeah, for 2019, that would be the second Starhopper flight, because the first one was, you couldn't see it lift out of the plume. You just saw the top. So from my perspective, from SpaceX's perspective, it was probably the more interesting event because it was the first test. But for us, for the audience, the second one was just much more interesting because you could actually see it. You could see the Raptor move and balance out the flight, and then it punched through the concrete deck because it had a hard landing and all that. So that was really interesting for me. That was the most interesting thing about 2019, and I hope we're going to see one of those events in the future soon.
With Starship.
Exactly, with a 20-kilometer test flight of the Starship, and then hopefully soon after an orbital flight. That would be incredible. So
what do you think? Which Starship Mark will fly first? Is it gonna be Mark III or more like Mark V?
It is really hard to say. It is a new development. It's something that was never there before. I think it is probably going to be easy-ish to get it into orbit, but then that would be half the test because they want to get it down again, and that's going to be much harder, in my opinion, to do that skydive maneuver and the flip over and then actually land the thing again. They've done incredible advancements with the Raptor engine recently. Elon Musk posted this picture with the Raptor engine with the Christmas lights on it, and I think that was SN17 already. So that is far along. That for anybody who doesn't know, the SN, the serial number, stands for version number. So it is the 17th engine that they made since they started making Raptor engines, and that is a long way because on every single on every single version they create, they have advancements, improvements, and so on. So I would bet that they haven't made two Raptor engines that were equal, that were the same. So that is a really, really fast advancement there. That
they're engineering the heck out of it.
Exactly. It's hard to say which one or when it's gonna reach orbit, but I'm crossing my fingers that it's gonna be Mark III. That's for sure.
Yeah. So this wraps up today's episode of What About It? Thank you, Felix, for answering all our questions.
You're very welcome. All right, it felt very strange for me to not actually be the host on the episode, but I think my wife did a brilliant job, and I want to thank you for doing this for me.
Yeah.
This is our wrap up for the year, basically. On I think December 30th, we're gonna have a collaboration episode with Chris from Beautiful Science. Then in January, as soon as it happens, we're gonna do the in-flight abort test of the Crew Dragon. That's going to be a live stream, and then after that we're going to start with new episodes Mondays and Thursdays as usual. I want to thank everybody who has been watching for the last half year. It's been a crazy ride, and I want to thank all the patrons again for the support they're giving, for the questions they had for me for this episode. It's been a blast doing this together with you guys and girls. We're very much looking forward to start into the new year with you. We have some very nice ideas we want to put into our episodes, and Merry Christmas
and a Happy New Year.
Cut!
Thank you. There's a kid coming upstairs.
Yeah,
you can hear it.